How's everybody doing? That's better, that's better. Another announcement, the CornCon CTF has kicked off. The link now is on our website as well with the QR code. Please feel free to join, as well as, again, the Corn Duck codes for Aaron Lintile's multiple, whatever he has going on here. There's so many I don't even know. That being said, I'm pleased to announce our next speaker, Labbe. He's a CISO of MM-ISAC, and he's going to give a great talk about how much fun we all had with CrowdStrike this year.
Oh shoot, I got to do a great talk. You never told me that one. All right, thanks. So as it says, we're going to talk a little bit about the CrowdStrike incident, but we're not going to bash CrowdStrike. We're not going to bash, well, that's right, I got to stay behind the pink line. We're not going to bash CrowdStrike or the companies that responded to it, but there are lessons that whether or not you happen to be a CrowdStrike customer, you probably should have learned from this incident. I am Rob Labbe. I'm the CEO and CISO-in-residence of the Mining and Metals ISAC, which is the global industry association for mining and metals customers. What's really cool about that job when it comes to things like this is instead of having to deal with the incident for one company, I got to work through it with a dozen companies. Which, yay! Which meant I slept really well for a couple days. But what it does mean is it gives me an interesting perspective on the organizations that handled it really well and those that struggled. And the point of this talk really is to try to bring those lessons together so that we can all learn from those incidents. Before I start, in the mining industry, because we're so safety conscious, we always start, whenever we've got more than 3 people in a room, we start with a safety message. Thankfully, we got to 3. I was a bit worried. So what I do want to focus on, particularly in the context of this talk, is mental health in an incident. Because there really are no more stressful times for cybersecurity people than in the middle of an incident. And we have seen over the last couple years with major incidents, whether it be the LastPass incident, the MGM incident, when I sit down and talk to the CISOs after the incident, to a person, they say, I wish I had done a better job taking care of my people. And that taking care of your people is something that needs to be in your incident response plan. And so some suggestions to put in there. Work hours. During an incident, we all could work 24/7 for the whole thing. Put in restrictions. Limit people to 12 hours maximum working. 16 hours maybe for the first day as a max short burst, but 12 hours of the maximum. Make sure you have somebody responsible for enforcing that isn't the incident manager. Have food and drinks and coffee and more coffee, and if you run out of coffee, get more coffee for people. Make sure they get positive management support. One of our members, when they were facing an incident about 1.5 years ago, the CEO was in their incident room every day. You guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. Getting that support really matters. Have somebody responsible for the proactive monitoring of mental health of your responders. Somebody who is not like us, like a people person, to do that. So if people start getting a little bit snippy, showing signs of stress, somebody who can tap them out. And a culture where if you get tapped out, you go home and it's not a sign of weakness or failure, it's, no, you need to be done, and you need to come back later when you're refreshed, because I do my best work when I'm stressed and panicking and freaking out, said nobody ever. And when you're like that, what you end up doing is actually extending the incident because you make mistakes. So have somebody tap that out. One company in our ISAC, they actually have in their plan, in a major incident, they call their company EAP, their employee assistant provider. They send a psychologist, and that person is there through the whole incident to monitor the mental health of the responders. An actual trained psychologist. You don't have to go that far. Train somebody in mental health first aid, get them certified in that, and have them be that person. Again, somebody who's a people person, a comms person, an HR person, an EA, somebody like that, versus a geek is probably best thought of. And then make sure your people, after working 12 hours, particularly overnight, have a safe ride home. Whether it be a hotel room next door so they can rest, Uber vouchers, taxi chits, whatever you end up doing, make sure people drive home. That has to be in your incident response plan. And when you rehearse your incident response plan, you also have to rehearse those things. You're still going to need those people after the incident. And they're no good to you if you break them during your incident. So that's all I've got on that. So main agenda, what we're going to talk about, a little review of what actually happened, just in case some of you are living under a rock and didn't realize something happened with CrowdStrike. We're going to talk a little bit about how our adversaries took advantage of that incident, because they did. And that will drive a lot of the lessons learned from it. We're going to talk a little bit about, since it is an EDR product, we'll talk a little bit about some best practices that have emerged from that, and our recommendations for best practice for EDR, whether you bought CrowdStrike or Trellix or whatever, Microsoft, whatever else you're using. And then there should be time at the end for some questions. So that's the game plan. All right, so first off, what happened? Simply put, in Windows world, most EDR endpoint products have to sit in the kernel. And the reason they have to sit there is because if you're above the kernel, you can't monitor what happens in it. And Microsoft allows developers to write kernel drivers and kernel code. So if you let people put code in the kernel, your EDR also has to chill out there. And if you've never done it, and I did get the, I might date myself, I did write kernel code for Sun graphics workstations in my younger days, but people who write kernel code are special. Speaking of mental health, it is wicked hard and it's wicked fragile. You don't get the error checking and the exception handling that you get in user land. And so we have to allow our code to run there. Now, kernel drivers at Microsoft, if you're going to put them in Windows, you have to submit them to Microsoft. They'll do a review to make sure they're not going to blow things up. They'll digitally sign them so they can run in the kernel, since Windows 8, at least. And that works really, really well, except it's also really, really slow. And so if you're doing an EDR, every time you detect a new attack vector, a new problem, and you want to put it in your kernel driver, you can't recode your kernel driver and send that to Microsoft to review and get it signed and come back. That's just too slow. And so what all the EDR vendors will do is they actually write an interpreter into their kernel driver so that they can apply new TTPs and new solutions via interpreted files. And anybody who's a developer knows how awesome interpreters can be. Put them in the kernel, it'll be fine, don't worry. So in this case, oh, I hit a button. In this case, CrowdStrike had identified a new attack vector that used name pipes, which is a kernel function. Name pipes is, if you're not familiar, how two unrelated processes can communicate with each other. And if there's a problem there, we can see how that could be bad. So they released the content, they developed the content update for that. Unfortunately, it escaped rather than got released through the QA process. And so if you look at the time, you know, this was July 19th, 4:09 UTC, they released their channel update. at 4:09, computers started blue screening. And then they realized it and released a fix at 5:27. Right? And so anybody who was running CrowdStrike at the time got that on their machines. And it was such a big impact for a couple reasons. Number one, this was not an engine update, it was a content update. A lot of companies have implemented N+1 or N+2 patching for the engine, so this doesn't happen. Unfortunately, content updates happen regularly. In the case of CrowdStrike, often 3 or 4 or 20 times a day as they detect new things. So you really can't do the N+1 updating. It doesn't respect that. So this was one of those content and channel updates. The bigger problem with this is as a kernel driver, it launches at boot. And so if there's an exception in it that does this, every time you boot, you get back to that. Now there's an easy fix. You boot into safe mode. That disables CrowdStrike. You fix it. You reboot. And life is great. Problem with that is you need to touch every single computer to do that. You can't do it remotely. Also, there's this little thing called BitLocker. And a lot of companies will escrow their BitLocker keys on their Active Directory server, which is also running CrowdStrike, which also looks like that, which requires the BitLocker key. You get the recursive loop. And so it's actually fairly challenging. And where we had companies that had problems, of course, is if you have outsourced all your desktop support to, say, India, it's really hard for them to reach out and touch them. Right? And that was your delay. And that's why it was such a big problem. But we got super lucky because of the timing of this particular update. I put the chart on there, right? So Eastern USA, just after midnight. Pacific USA, 9:09. London, 5 in the morning. The beauty of that, the vast majority of user computers in North America, what were they? Off. And then CrowdStrike released the fix. I'm going to keep hitting that button all day. At 5:27, so East Coast 1:27. By the time they booted back up again, they got the fixed version. Life was great. So for most North American and European companies, it just got all your servers. That's fine. You didn't need those anyways. The ones who really ended up wearing this is APAC. And this drove the equivalent of congressional hearings in Australia because they really ended up wearing it because this hit them Perth time 12:09 in the afternoon. Enjoy your lunch, right? And so for most of us in this room, we got super lucky because you didn't have to go around and touch every single one of your user LAN computers. You just had to deal with your servers, and most of your server support team is onshore. So consolation prize. But really the root cause of this and why it's important we learn the lessons from it is this happened to CrowdStrike this time. If you read CrowdStrike's post-incident report, and full credit to them, they did a fantastic post-incident report. They absolutely admitted all of their issues and problems that led up to it. But when you read it, you don't go, oh my God, how'd this happen? Your response is, oh gosh, how did it take this long for this to happen? And the reality is, even though if you look at LinkedIn, certain other vendors were very quick to chime in and say, oh, this couldn't happen to me. Cognitive dissonance is what you call that. It means we got lucky and we read the report and we're changing what we're doing too so it doesn't happen to us, whew, is what it means. But the reality is in industry as a whole, in cybersecurity tools in particular, we've got a massive software quality problem. Massive. And until we fix that, which I'm not counting on happening at any point in my career, this is going to happen again. To somebody, to some tool. So like I said, even if you got lucky and you weren't staring at a blue screen, you need to take the lessons from it because you're going to get your turn. The other interesting thing that happened to me was super interesting, and in hindsight I shouldn't have been as interested and surprised, is how our adversaries took advantage of this. Because remember, during events, I mean, people fall into one of 5 categories, right? They're helpful, they're curious, they get anxious, they run away, or they exploit it. Right? And so we saw a bunch of opportunistic attacks, right? All kinds of CrowdStrike and Microsoft themed fish, escaped from the pens. There were fake updates and fake hot fixes. All kinds of misinformation from every expert that existed coming out into LinkedIn and to Reddit and to everywhere. All kinds of ransomware rats and wipers got delivered. And that's because of the timing. For those of you in the back who can't see this, the slides will go up. Sherry, our intelligence director, put this together. 7:15 UTC was the first time Google publicly announced this is a CrowdStrike problem. Before that, there was speculation. It's Microsoft this, not a bad guess. It's this other one, it's this cause, it's that cause. Nobody really knew. There's a lot of speculation. 7:15 was when Google Cloud, that first public, okay, this is CrowdStrike. 7:51, CrowdStrikeUpdate.com got registered to deliver malware. That is what, 40 minutes? That's not bad. And from there, and CrowdStrike sort of warned, that site started delivering a helpful CrowdStrike update. It did fix CrowdStrike's problem for you, by the way, because with the blue screen, they couldn't get their rat to run. So they did fix CrowdStrike and also installed a rat. And by the way, by fix, they meant fix the blue screen and disable so that their rat could run. That is minutes afterwards. And so when we get to the good versus bad, think about your users stuck staring at a blue screen, wanting to get their job done. They heard it was CrowdStrike. They're not hearing communication, so to be helpful, what are they going to do? They're going to go to their personal computer, their phone, or whatever, and they're going to Google it. They're going to find CrowdStrikeUpdate.com. They find the hot fix. They're going to download it. They're going to boot to safe mode, put it on there, and phew, I can get back to work. I'm helping. And I don't blame them, by the way. They've got stuff to do. They've got work to get done. They've got reports to do. They've got things. They're busy. They don't have time to wait for this stuff. And so that was a common theme of those that did poorly. Their incident got extended by days, weeks, months, because they didn't just have to fix CrowdStrike, they had to fix all the malware on all the computers too, without CrowdStrike, because that got disabled. So moving forward, what can we expect? I got no crystal ball, but we're going to see a lot more of this. Right? This time it was CrowdStrike. Trellix might be next, or Carbon Black, or who knows who. And if it's not one of those, it'll be some other piece of software your company relies on that the developer is going to mess up, and it's going to cause a problem for your organization. It's not a matter of if and when, so we need to learn from this one, which is the biggest one. So really I can divide up the companies that handle this into two camps. There's the ones that decided this isn't a security problem, it's an IT problem. And so in those companies, we saw unclear ownership of who it was. You know, the CISO said, hey, IT problem. The CIO and the infrastructure manager goes, it's your tool. Right? We saw a lot of freelancing of individual users trying to fix the problem, or individual administrators, and a whole lot of, right, he did it. The ones who did well said, you know something? This is a security incident. It's not a B word breach, but it is most certainly an incident. And they went, well, we weren't planning for this one, but I'm going to pull out my incident response plan. I'm going to flip to the page that most looks like what this is, which ironically is ransomware. And I'm going to run my ransomware playbook. And the companies that did that typically were up and running within hours to days. And that was the difference. You know, this debate about whether or not this was an incident or not, for those of you who are on LinkedIn or Reddit, was fascinating to watch for about a week. Endless entertainment. I actually managed to stay out of it, so I'm very proud of me. But the reality is this, was it an incident? If you ask me, absolutely it was. CIA, a blue screen seems to affect a little bit, it counts. Our definition of an incident, the ISAC, a cyber event that materially impacts or has the potential to impact the ability of the company to execute on its mission in a safe, sustainable way. An incident can be malicious, inadvertent, or a control or secure technology failure. Now, this counts. It's an incident. However, where it got worse was I was talking to one CISO who was looking for my advice because he was planning to go to his CEO's office to say, you know, even though this was technology I bought, that I manage, and I run, this isn't a security incident. Was the conversation he was going to get ready to go have with his CEO. I told him I didn't advise that. I told him best case he gets fired on the spot, because worst case he doesn't get fired and the CEO will never trust him again. So, you know, pick your one. He did go try to make that argument. That company is now looking for a new CISO. Can't say I didn't warn him. But these are incidents. So why did this even become a debate? The reason this became a debate is because of a mismatch of objectives at its core. You know, the business in mining has objectives like safety, let's not kill people, let's produce whatever we produce, right? Turn big rocks into little rocks. They've got sustainability and ESG objectives. They've got cost reduction, cost per ton, all in sustaining cost objectives, what have you. What's the security team objectives look like? They look like things like no material incidents. Oh, this is material, I got to blame somebody else for that because that's not good for my bonus. They've got compliance and control maturity. They've got something about awareness and then maybe their budget. That mismatch of objectives is what causes that argument. If the security team's argument had things like turn big rocks into little rocks, had things like ESG in production, then there wouldn't even be a discussion on what this was and who does it and who owns it. But it's that mismatch that drives the overall collision. When we think about what our job is as CISOs and in security, it's not really to stop incidents. I mean, it'd be nice if we stopped some. But, you know, the research shows, I I'm doing an MBA, and for my research for fun, I've been digging into insurance claims data. It's fascinating. It'll put you, if you got insomnia problems, let me know. I'll give you some reports. I'll fix it for you. But what it shows, when we look at cyber insurance claims from one of the world's biggest brokers, and we look at the control maturity questionnaires they use for underwriting, the companies that do worst, lowest maturity, have about an 80% chance of a material incident. The insurance company's definition of material is, it was big enough you had to put in a claim. We had to pay you. That's material to them. 80% chance, that makes sense, right? Low maturity, 80% chance. The companies that did the best, had the highest maturity, what do you figure the odds of them making a claim was? What do you think? 80% for worst. What do you figure the odds of a claim were for the people that did the best on that maturity questionnaire? Throw a number out. Anybody? 60? Any other guesses? No gamblers here, all right. 50%. The most mature had a 50% chance of a claim in any period of time. The best they could get to was a coin flip. So when we think about our job, it's not just controls to reduce the likelihood, it's resilience to reduce the impact. The cornerstone to resilience is, and for the companies that did well, is an effective incident response plan. And by effective, there's a couple attributes of good incident response plans. Good incident response plans obviously scale up to handle the big global incidents like the CrowdStrike or a massive attack, but they also scale down to cover malware on one computer because Johnny clicked on something I wish he wouldn't have. And that's important. Because if your incident response plan is only for the big incident, and we saw this during this CrowdStrike bit, and you only pick it off the shelf when you have a major incident, and then blow the dust off, what's the problem? Nobody remembers what's in it or how to do it. However, if you follow the same process, just scale down to 1 or 2 responders and people for every single incident, then your whole team knows it. That's a lesson we've learned from the fire service, is that they will follow the same incident command system, their incident response plan, for a hurricane, like what hit the southern US, or for a cat in a tree or a garbage can on fire. The same process, so you don't have to relearn it. Right? That lesson applies to us as well. It allows for unity of command. That's just simple for one person in charge, and everybody knows who it is. One person in charge of the incident, they delegate certain aspects to one person who's in charge of getting that done. So everybody knows who to talk to, everybody knows who their boss is, everybody knows who what their task is. And that allows for clear communication, coordination, and it takes care of the freelancing, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to go Google it and see what I find out, and the nice people at CrowdStrikeUpdate.com have my back. It allows for manageable span of control. In normal times, it wasn't uncommon for me to manage 15, 20 people. I can do that. During an incident, we've done the research. The most any one human can manage is about 8, with 5 being about the sweet spot. Any more of that, we hit the limits of human cognitive capacity. And we've learned in this case from aviation what happens when humans hit the limits of their cognitive capacity. We know that really well. Airplanes fly into mountains. Right? We know that happens. or equivalent. We have clear roles and responsibilities. But the best incident response plan only works if A, everybody knows about it, B, it's trained, practiced, rehearsed. And through tabletops, through exercises, and through using it every single day. So, coming through it and through the lessons, what are the next steps and what's the guidance that surfaces for folks running through this? If you happen to be a CrowdStrike customer, conduct a lessons learned, a retrospective, and get the lessons you can pull out of this. Make it blame-free. Have it conducted by somebody who wasn't involved, who isn't emotionally invested, ideally as a third party to come and do it for you. And do it soon while memories are still fresh. If you weren't, figure out what your CrowdStrike is. What's your tool that will ruin your world? And tabletop that. Get people in a room and went, all right, it died, all our computers are blue screened, what do we do now? And work through that exercise, do the same thing. Compare how you did against those best performers. Did you pull out your incident response plan? Was it clear? Did people know what they're doing, or did they make it up as they went along? Did you execute a previously written or rehearsed playbook, or did you not find anything in that incident response plan that fit, so you had to turn to the last page, which is the all other incidents section? Right? Was span of control manageable? Were tactical priorities clear? Did you manage the mental health and burnout of your team well? And most importantly, because no matter how well you do, little Johnny's still going to go to CrowdStrikeUpdate.com. Did you maintain capacity to deal with other incidents through it? Right? Because the world doesn't stop because we're dealing with this thing over here. Right? People are still clicking because we didn't take away their mice. So you're still going to have problems. Right? So do you have that ability? Some of the best practices that emerge and some guidance. Number one, when things like this happen, the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of people was, I'm going to dump CrowdStrike. And we heard that. We saw that on LinkedIn and Reddit and everywhere else. Yeah, don't do that as a knee-jerk. Right? If you want to change for all kinds of reasons, go ahead. But do it as a project. Do your risk assessment. Do your bake-off for your replacement. Do your exercise through it. Right? Don't do it based on emotion. Do it based on logic. And certainly don't do what Elon did. Right? Don't, the day of the incident, tweet, we just removed CrowdStrike from all our computers. Right? Don't be like Elon. Some of the other best practices that have emerged. And this is guidance we gave before CrowdStrike, and it doesn't change because CrowdStrike happened. For those of you who have operational technology, try to find one EDR that you can use across both halves of your world. And that's important because we find when people do multiple, all kinds of stuff falls in that crack between the two. And so, on the day-to-day, the back button on this is super loose. When I use my hand, it clicks back. Right? It gives you that single view. It gives you that single way to track incidents all the way through. It simplifies training and staff development and staffing and all those things. It's still worth doing that, and I still recommend it even with the CrowdStrike thing. The difference being is, of course, you follow the other recommendations and have some resilience and can recover quickly to go with it. But I still think your odds are better sticking with one. For configuration of that endpoint, we recommend for user computers, use a cloud-based controller because laptops walk away and get off the network. Definitely look at N-0.5, N-1 deployments to try to catch the more common engine update problems versus content, right? If you can, phase your content rollouts very quickly. 10% of your computers immediately, the next 50% an hour later even, the next math, 40%, right, an hour after that. One of CrowdStrike's biggest issues for them in their post-incident report is they admitted, hey, we were incentivized and prioritized to get maximum protection to everybody as quickly as possible, so when we had one, we dumped it to the planet. They've now rethought the logic of that, and they're doing similar. When they release content updates now, they phase it out 10% of the fleet. You know, sorry for those customers. 50, 40. And by the way, they randomly pick the 10, 50, 40, so it's not the same sucker that gets to try it first every time, which is nice. And you're going to want all detection running. You want auto containment, all those things. Servers, you're going to want to be a little bit behind. You're going to want to do your content updates just after workstations. Realistically, that makes sense because your attack is likely to hit workstations first anyways. Because that, you know, people shouldn't be surfing the internet and answering email on your servers, right? So odds are they get hit second anyways and work through. In OT, you go a step later than that. And they become the last to update to give it some cover going through. But ultimately, you know, wrapping up, while this issue itself was clearly an error on behalf of CrowdStrike, and they own that, so I feel fair in saying that because they admitted it. The fact that some companies were still down weeks or months after it happened wasn't CrowdStrike's fault, right? At some point after about hour 12, I would say roughly, because the best performers were all up and running, when I look across, over 50% were up and running completely within 12 hours. After about that point, it stopped being, you know, CrowdStrike's fault, and it was the organization's lack of resiliency, lack of preparedness, and other decisions that made it a bigger issue. Adversaries were super quick to pick up on this. CrowdStrikeUpdate.com was up and serving malware 40 minutes after the first confirmation that this was CrowdStrike. 40 minutes. Before it was on CNN and LinkedIn and everywhere else. 40 minutes after, give the Google guys credit, they were the first ones to identify it was CrowdStrike, so they get the points for that. 40 minutes after they published that, CrowdStrikeUpdate.com was up and serving malware. That's remarkably fast. And by the way, they got their SEO done really well too, so it came up in the search engines. I don't think that 40-minute time period is going to get longer with AI and other things. That is only going to go in one direction. Right? I think back to the last big outage a few years ago, we didn't see malware serve targeting it for days. Now it's 40 minutes. The next one is going to be, that's not fair, I wasn't even touching it. Someone else has a clicker there and is pranking me. Right? 40 minutes is going to be 10, is going to be 2. There is going to be a next time. Figure out what your vulnerabilities are. What is the software, be it security, IT tools, others, We've seen problems in Azure. We've seen problems in Office 365. We've seen Windows issues. We've seen libraries in Linux. We've seen all ranges of issues from all kinds of vendors until we figure out software quality. Please. We're going to get more of these. CrowdStrike was a shot across the bow. It was a warning for all of us. This is and was an incident. Any dancing around that, you're doing a disservice to yourself. Like I said, I know companies that spent the first day of this not fixing it because they're busy fighting about whose incident it was and who was going to own it and whose metrics this was going to get marked against and. Right? These are incidents. Put them in your incident response plan. Those who treated it that way from minute one did so much better, universally, than those who didn't. Those who struggled, when I look back root cause, it was that mismatch on objectives. Good thing we're in like end of Q4 now. You're probably starting to think about what your objectives are going to be for next year. So timing works. They should map directly back to business objectives. The business doesn't care what your NIST score is. They really, really don't. Right? We care, maybe. You can put it on your fridge, your mom will be proud, but the business doesn't care. Your objectives really need to be tied to whatever your company does. In my case, big rocks into little rocks. If you're in healthcare, it should be tied to patient outcomes. If you're in finance, it should be charged to profit or whatever they care about. If you're in government, it should be tied to whatever your department's worried about. Education to student outcomes, all of those things. And finally, if you did get the pleasure of working through this as a CrowdStrike customer, it's a gift. You might not have thought of it at the time, but it's a gift. It's a gift of measuring your preparedness for a major ransomware issue. It's a gift to measure your preparedness for all kinds of major issues. The nice thing about CrowdStrike was, yeah, it took down your computers, but it didn't steal and sell your data. You didn't get a ransom note. Well, you'll get your next invoice. I guess it's the same thing. But you didn't get that negative consequence. That's a gift. Use it to get better for the next thing. For those of you who didn't, all of my teams I've ever managed know rule 0 for me is it's great to learn from your mistakes. It's way better to learn from somebody else's. You've got your own CrowdStrikes. Take the time, run the tabletop, simulate that, and do the same lessons learned. Get the same gift. Look across your industry, find a friend that had CrowdStrike that went through it. Bring them in to talk to your team and share their experiences so you can learn from it. Buy them a beer after, they're going to need it. But do those things and then update your incident response plan so that you don't also have to do it the hard way when you get it. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that stress. So that's what I've got. If you want to find me, there's my LinkedIn QR code. It is LinkedIn, I promise. It's even got the little LinkedIn thing there. That makes it safe, right? It's fine, I'm sure. And my email address there for folks that don't want to do it. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn the analog way too. I am happy to wrap it up here. I'm right on time, 15 minutes left, so that gives me 15 minutes for any questions folks might have. One right here.
One thing that struck me odd was you said security calling an incident between, as opposed to IT calling it their problem. Don't most IT teams have an incident response plan too, for when there's stuff that breaks?
So the question on the debate of whether it was an incident or not, is, don't most IT teams have some kind of a plan for when their stuff just magically breaks anyways? I would hope so. I can't speak for them all, but I'd hope so. However, if you're stuck in the, it's your incident, no, it's your incident, well, then nobody's plan gets started. When you're busy having that bun fight, right, you've got two directors or VPs in a room having the, it's your fault thing, everybody else is sitting there going, the world's burning. Can we start fixing it, please? I don't care whose plan we run, right? Can we start now, right? And then what most people will do, because they care, is they start anyways, without the plan. And that's not always as helpful at the end as you think it might be, right? But it's that bun fight that got in the way. Yes, they had a plan. But if I run my plan, it affects my metrics and my bonus. If we run your plan, it's on yours. You see? Yeah. Right here. So I am going to refrain from commenting specifically on Delta's challenges. I don't work there. I don't work in there. I don't have any insight to what was going on inside of Delta other than what I read on LinkedIn and Reddit and where everybody else read. So I'm not going to go into what may have gone wrong for Delta. That's for them to go figure out. However, based on the letters I've seen back and forth, we might all find out in court soon enough. It'll be fascinating. But what I will say is clearly based upon results, their resilience plan had some gaps that hopefully they've gone back and they've fixed. Is that fair? Pardon me? So, Southwest, sometimes you get lucky. Right? When the whole, we've seen that a couple times with major incidents where the guy who doesn't patch and doesn't update doesn't get hit because, and I mean, we get some of that in mining too. We've got 40, 50-year-old systems that, we don't worry about this for because they're 40 or 50 years old, it's fine. But Southwest has their own problems that come from that age. They just don't get this one, right? They're in that camp where they've got their CrowdStrike equivalents. They should have been in that camp where I'm glad we got to sit on the sidelines for this one. Sorry to hear about your bad luck. We should tabletop our equivalent. And I hope they go and do that if they haven't already. They were running a version of Windows from 1992. It was a good year for Windows, apparently. Like a wine, right? Yep, no, lots of ATMs, lots of critical infrastructure still runs, Windows for workgroups. I've been to mines as recently as last year where I found Wintendo running, which is what I call Windows 95. I hit the button. User error. So we still find that, by the way, free career tip. Check. There we go, working battery. Free tip, when you work for Microsoft and you're doing presentations with a blue shirt on, you shouldn't call Windows 95 Wintendo, just for the record. Don't know how I learned that. But we see that a lot in critical infrastructure. And the reason for that is simple. It's not as simple as updating Windows 95. You've got to update the equipment that Windows 95 is connected to. That's a multi-billion-dollar thing. And in some cases, you don't replace the equipment in the building, you tear down the building to replace the equipment and build a new one around it, because that's how it got in there. Right? They poured the slab, they installed the equipment, they built the building around it. Right? So you actually can't replace it until the end of life of that equipment. And so you're stuck with figuring out how to secure it, which is why I love working in mining, because it's wicked hard problems like that. Anything else? Anyone else? Bueller? Oh, we're good. Thanks a lot, everybody.